Welcome to our show with me, Eliot Baker, and Petri Kuivala. Today we'll be discussing leveraging the Verizon DBIR to improve your security awareness program. So some quick housekeeping. The webinar recording and slides will be shared with you later today. Use the Q&A feature to ask our speakers questions that they can answer throughout or at the end, speakers being Petri and I. And if you have any questions after the webinar, please reach out to us at hoxhunt.com. First up, we have Petri Kuivala, the CISO advisor of Hoxhunt, the former CISO of Nokia and NXP Semiconductors, and someone who has been one of the leading experts in the CISO profession for a very long time. Petri, great to have you here as always.
Thanks, Eliot. Good to be here again.
And that's me, Eliot Baker. So we will be looking at what actually is the Verizon DBIR. Presumably everybody here who is watching the show knows what it is. But what we're really going to be looking at are the key takeaways in reference to the human element and how to apply the insights from the DBIR to your security awareness program. So first of all, what is the Verizon DBIR? These are the bullet points, Petri, but I think that basically the summary of it all is that this is kind of the Bible of cybersecurity. This is the ultimate reference point. And when you're going to be talking about what's going on with the latest trends, when you're trying to cite a statistic, you are probably going to go to the DBIR as far as you're trying to get some kind of credibility for what you're going to be citing. So what's your take on the Verizon DBIR?
I would agree that your summary is good. I think that one of the biggest problems with the whole industry is that we are still lacking systematic data about the breaches and what led to the breaches. And Verizon DBIR, as I call it, has been my Bible, at least for the last 17 years. Of course, I have been reading multiple other great documents like the IBM's breach report every year. I believe that CISO's job is really to constantly learn about the statistics to understand that what are the probabilities of different risks, and then be capable of actually making the investment decisions in a data-driven way, as data-driven as it's possible. So yes, I believe that Verizon DBIR is one of the best documents in the whole industry.
Great points. So we'll jump right into the key findings of the Verizon DBIR. First of all, Petri, what does this tell you when you look at 68% of cybersecurity breaches involve a human element?
Yeah, I think that that's self-evident fact in many sense. First of all, of course, the number is huge. Having almost 70% of contributing of these breaches to human behavior at some stage of the breach life cycle is a huge number. It tells to me that we as an industry have been focusing a lot to the technology, which is absolutely one of the cornerstones and key pillars in the cybersecurity. Whatever we can kind of do with the technology to help the human beings of not being fallible for the mistakes, which humans will always be doing, that's great. But it tells me that the other side is also very, very clever. When we bring in more and more iron to the border, so to say, the more they find other ways of getting into the companies and doing the malicious stuff. And this number tells me that we haven't been so far extremely good in helping the end users and other human beings in our workforces of proactively and reactively actually engaging with cybersecurity, having high engagement rate in a meaningful way so that actually this number would be going lower.
And that's a good segue into this, is that maybe we haven't been so good. But when you look at the numbers over the last couple of years here, going back to just to 2021, which was, I think everyone can remember that as being the year of ransomware. That was when the pandemic was in full swing. And that number, 85%, was pretty shocking. Also, just really quick, it bears mentioning that the numbers from the Verizon DBIR on the human element tend to be quite conservative. I think the World Economic Forum's numbers put it well over 90% for the number of breaches attributed to the human element. You know, different reasons for that. But still, there is this trend, 85, 82, 74, 68, Real quick, Petri, are we winning? Is this something that is cause for celebration?
Are we winning? I think that in some sense, yes, of course, we are winning. If I'm looking backwards of my whole career, which actually in cybersecurity started before DBIR was reported, given first time 17 years ago, we as an industry have developed hugely. We are not anymore making actually the same elementary mistakes, at least as widely as many as we used to do back then. So we have been developing hugely. But then when you are focusing to the last 4 years of the human behavior only, you see a certain type of trend of us getting better. But if I'm assuming actually to the whole 17 years, all of those reports that I have been reading through, I believe that there's a kind of natural type of long trends that you can see from there. The initial years were fully focused on technology issues, and most of the breaches were actually back then reported to be associated with external vulnerabilities of the perimeter controls or so. That's still, of course, there, but it is not as huge as it used to be like 17 years ago. Maybe somewhere around 10 years ago, suddenly actually the human element and social engineering started to grow. Cannot immediately remember on top of my head that what was the year, but I recall approximately 10 years ago when it was reported that social engineering was 25%. Then it grew to be the number one topic that the DBIR was talking about, and it was talked a lot about. Then when you are looking at the recent years, yes, there has been this sort of kind of trend which is looking good. But this said, for example, on 24, Verizon changed their way of reporting. And in case if they would have used the same criteria back there as they did last year, the number would have been 76 for this year. My main takeaway is that if you are talking about somewhere around 68 to 85%, it is still bloody hell a huge number that we need to address and become much better about.
Yeah, that's a really good point also. That final point is that if the reporting of the Verizon DBIR had been with the same criteria as last year, the number would have been actually about the same as last year, slightly more. So while there is some cause for celebration here, we should probably hold off on really popping the champagne on this trend a little bit.
Yeah, what I would be celebrating is that finally the people's side of the conversation is obviously paid attention to. And this is way beyond the DBIR, Gartner and Forrester and many other kind of reputable parties are actually talking about it, that you can engage people, you can actually bring them to be a meaningful part of your protection. We'll talk about soon a bit more about it. But anyway, that's, in my opinion, something to celebrate for.
And that's a great point and a great segue as far as the DBIR is actually bringing the human element into the popular consciousness and into the boardroom's consciousness and to the CEO's consciousness. Let's look back at 2021 and the year of ransomware. There was when I first came to Hoxhunt, I read the Verizon DBIR 2021 very carefully because there was a lot of attention towards the failings of the SAT programs, the security awareness training tools that were out there. And I'm just going to read this out loud really quickly because this felt like a real gauntlet being thrown, like a real flag being planted on everybody. We need to wake up. This is a real problem here. And it comes down to us not properly empowering and equipping our people. So Verizon Media believes the simulations and training offered by most security education teams don't mimic real-life situations, don't parallel the behaviors that led to breaches, and are not measured against real attacks the organization receives. This is why it is important to progress from the traditional security awareness model to that of using behavioral science to change the habits that lead to attack path breaking actions. Petri, when you see that, what does that tell you? Where were we at? Where are we going now? Have we gotten to where this is telling us we need to go?
Yeah, you started your comment actually about the C-level and the board reporting. Let me quickly comment that first. I think people in cybersecurity is one common bridge is that the board level and the CISO should be actually be capable of talking about. It is sometimes very difficult to talk with the upper management coming from the cyber because they don't necessarily understand your technological jargon. I think that it's an excellent segue of helping you to form a really good candor discussion with them. So that's my first take on. Then to your comment about moving from the SAT, so security awareness training module, into the behavior change type of approach, I think that that's actually something that is now really speeding up. We see ourselves great results of being capable of changing the behavior of the human beings in a very consistent way, and we know what is the recipe. And the recipe is really related to the behavior science that has been studied in multiple universities, the best universities in the world, like Stanford University and its major professor, B.J. Fogg, for example. But there is plenty of other extremely good psychological analysis which helps us to actually digest the real recipe of changing the human behavior.
Yeah, we'll get a lot more into that later on, but there's absolutely important insights that you just related there. So, key findings. What did you find to be particularly interesting when it comes to the human element related key findings of the DBIR this year?
Yeah, here I have a bit kind of criticism for the report itself. I think that the report sometimes mixes and matches things that shouldn't be mixed and matched. Like here, the ransom and extortion, that's a kind of outcome of an incident, whereas then the human element and breaches related to the human errors, they are not outcomes, they are kind of means of getting in. Anyway, the main takeaway here is that the human element is, of course, huge. It is not only related to the social engineering, it relates also to the regular errors that the end users are doing, and it relates to multiple other stuff as well. This is something that the DBIR and the Verizon could actually open a bit better, what sort of categories they have bundled within, for example, the human category here. Otherwise, 10% of breaches emerging from the third parties, there has been a significant growth in that area, and that's quite logical. So if you are capable of making your technology stack to be in a perfect order, it has really been improved a lot. If you are capable of actually making your human layer well protected, then the question is that, for example, with Nokia, we had more than 11,000 vendors around of us. How the heck do you make them secure? And then that's, of course, something that they need to make themselves secure. There is multiple kind of ways of getting into the companies, and that would be kind of the social engineering, vulnerabilities, weak authentications, and then misusing the trust, where the third parties is one of the main things. Those are, in my opinion, the main categories of getting into the company, and then it's interesting to see that what is the possible outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot to that also. I mean, the DBIR is so amazing because it's able to reveal trends that have been happening, and sometimes it feels like they're looking into a crystal ball because they were looking at a data set before the United Healthcare Change Healthcare breach, and many people, particularly in North America, who are joining us today, are going to know just what a catastrophic breach that's been in the healthcare industry. It happens to be probably the biggest critical infrastructure breach we've had with Colonial Pipeline a few years back. And I think, ironically, it's probably done by the same threat actors as well. So as far as I understand, it's a little bit murky, but that appears to have involved a third-party breach in that. Also, I think it's interesting, in addition to you needing to defend your entire environment that could potentially be breached around you, is that a lot of companies have found that they are going to be more competitive as a business when they're able to show greater resilience. Some companies will no longer do business with you if you're trying to do business with like a huge, like a Microsoft or with the larger automotive companies. They want to make sure that you actually do have a very strong security posture.
Yeah, I would agree on that, and that has been also seen in regulations here in Europe, and I believe in the USA as well. Let's not get deeper into that one, but for example, the NIS2 regulation is emphasizing the third-party management much better than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely. This is interesting. So I think what this is all leading into, when we're talking about the human element and trying to keep people empowered and equipped to spot and report attacks, that's basically what this graph is here, is that there is apparently a pretty good trend in that are not just like deleting or not interacting with phishing simulation, but 20% of users reported phishing simulation that the DBIR was citing in the report. And 11% of users who clicked the email also reported. Let me throw that back to you. What does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, first of all, 20, it's great to celebrate some success here that we have been kind of growing worldwide to this number of 20. I do believe that it needs to be at least 50% to be able to actually be really meaningful, where you engage really of your people in systematic manner, which helps then security operating centers of responding to most of the attacks that comes through this way. 11% of reporting after they have clicked something. That's quite a low number to be fully honest. It can relate to multiple things. If you are not having the feeling of psychological safety, for example, you don't necessarily want to report your own mistakes to the security team. That's something that companies should be actually paying quite a lot of attention, because humans will always make mistakes. It also highlights most probably that the engagement of the end users is not necessarily that high. They could easily believe that it is someone else's problem. IT security will take care of it on my behalf. Why do I need to bother? And somehow you need to really engage your people much better to be able to avoid these sort of loopholes where you have 89% of people who are not actually caring, or for some reason not reporting when they have already done something that should be reported for.
Yeah, very key point. The concept of psychological safety that you can establish, and you can really start doing that from your security awareness program. When you're communicating with people, the lessons that they should be taking to heart when it comes to cybersecurity, you want them to feel safe to actually come to the security team if they've made a mistake, as opposed to if they're always fearing being fired, or if they're fearing being put in a phishing prison if they make a mistake on a simulation. Of course, they're going to feel the same kind of reluctance to admit that a mistake has been made in the real thing. And as we're going to see more and more in this report, interestingly, is speed is essential. So the quicker that you can actually get the security operations center to react to an incident, to a bad click, then you're going to have a huge advantage in mitigating that problem. And really quick, I thought it was interesting that in the report, they put the reporting rate above the ransomware plus extortion equal 2/3 of financially motivated attacks. I don't know if that was just an accident of the way that things were laid out, but I think it's just, again, it drives home to what you mentioned earlier about categories being separated, is that it's often lost as a part of the misconception that these ransomware attacks and extortions are like completely separate from social engineering and phishing attacks, when most of these attacks are initiated by some kind of a social engineering or phishing vector.
Yeah, far away from separated. I think that they are just the different phases of the attack path. Usually you get in actually with the social engineering into the company. Then you do certain type of lateral movement, as you know, from the kill chain. And then in the worst case scenarios, people are capable of taking over, or the attackers are capable of taking over the Active Directory or the so-called tier 0 services, and then spread the extortion to the whole damn company. So yes, it's interesting and important to see that what might be the end result and outcome. But before the outcome, there is of course those 4 means that are listed earlier on to get into the company.
Petri, this is your chance to really explain to people what the DBIR has meant to you over the past 17 years and what the key takeaways are that you have applied towards your own security awareness programs.
Yeah, so as I started this whole conversation with this thing that it's a Bible. It's a Bible of data that helps you to understand that how the world around of you develops. Of course, you usually, as a human being, you form your own opinions and ideas based on your experiences. But usually when you are sitting as a CISO in one certain company, your view into the world is very narrow. Reading these sort of reports continuously and making actually summaries out of those to the different parts of the organization helps the CISOs really to make the decisions where to invest. As said earlier on, the social engineering and the human element has been growing for the last 10 years and then actually staying on a very high level consistently over the years. Now, this year, there was the notion that the web application attacks made a kind of huge entrance. They became the most attacked area related to breaches, but it was mostly related to the kind of vulnerability or problem. And that can always happen, that there is kind of these sort of sudden spikes for 1 year, even if you are collecting the data from hundreds of different organizations. But usually we as an industry, we are capable of actually fixing those technological issues quite rapidly. Of course, they are very worrisome as they show quite a lot about the underlying structural weaknesses of our organization and the whole technology-driven society. But the human element really is the thing that we should not be neglecting, even if it's not always the most natural area for the technology-oriented folks.
The human element is the most obvious place to attack, and yet it seems to be the most inobvious place to fix. It's a kind of a strange paradox there.
It is. The core of the social engineering, phishing, this was an interesting data point about the dwell time, that really less than a minute before the attackers are capable of getting into the company. And many times they even have the credentials from the end user. So if you don't have the 2FA in place, it can quickly cause you problems. And I believe that the statistics related to the business email compromise proves that not all the companies are having yet at least the 2FAs in place or related processes. I believe also that if you do this well, if you engage your end users well, who will be reporting way beyond of the 20% of the cases, I would say somewhere 60 to 80% of the cases to the security operating centers, then they are capable actually of reducing the noise from the SOC table hugely, which then helps them to focus into the most difficult breaches and most difficult incidents that they have in their landscape. Currently, the SOCs are wasted with huge amount of data that they are getting. And if they are not harnessing the end user brain power, they are, in my opinion, wasting huge resource. You can easily harness basically 80%, even 100% of the end users helping you of reacting and finding about the real issues.
Yeah, the concept of speed and the element of speed is so important in security. And I thought it was really encouraging that the DBIR brought that up this year. In our own research, we found that you can actually tap into the element of speed by really finding the people who are going to report these things, these phishing attacks, quickly enough that you can remove it from the system for the other people who are a little bit less savvy.
Maybe one word still about the speed. It was not in a DBIR, but Microsoft reported it recently that average time for lateral movement actually starting is 72 hours after the initial breach. So if you do the initial breach within a minute or so, then you usually have about 72 hours. And anyone and everyone who has been working with the SOCs knows that even 72 hours is bloody damn short. So you should be focused on getting this noise away to help the SOC to clean their table.
That's a really great point. And it also comes back to the idea of psychological safety you mentioned earlier, where we saw that only 11% of people who have clicked on a simulation then reported it. If you can get people to acknowledge that it clicked on something quicker, then the remediation can begin well before 72 hours. It can begin instantaneously.
Correct. Alrighty, but then let me take this right away. This is, in my opinion, interesting, especially from the position where I'm sitting. When I'm discussing with large customers, especially from the US, they have been highlighting hugely lately about the importance of phishing, and they have been telling me the most recent incidents has been actually related to the phishing itself. When I'm looking into the DBIR statistics, it still seems to be kind of negligible, and it's all about the email-based phishing. That, though, of course, most probably tells me the story that the other side is always using the means that are still working. Why do you need to train yourself of using something new when the old tools are still working? We may be a bit kind of bored already about the phishing itself, but based on this data, bloody hell, it seems to be working for the other side. So I don't think that we are actually perfect at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. The fish are jumping out of email and they're jumping into our phones, they're jumping into our SMS. So maybe it hasn't quite made it into the DBIR yet, but we've certainly seen a trend there.
Yeah, we do. That's interesting also. Most probably it's also about Verizon not necessarily having the same data sources as we do. And then, of course, we do have a focus to the human element only. So probably next year, I would assume at least that these numbers here will be developing a bit more.
Yeah, let's see. I think that would be a bold prediction for next year based off of this. What do you think of the Gen AI usage being low in the DBIR?
Yeah, that's another interesting actually notification from them. Gen AI and LLMs has been in the focus everywhere for the last year for multiple great reasons. And we in the security industry are afraid that they will be used against of us. What we are able to see within the Hoxhunt is that they are already used. The increase of sophistication of those phishing attacks is very clear for us. The language related issues and spelling mistakes are not anymore actually there. And if we are not training the end users of being ready for reporting real attacks, which are pruned from language point of view, we will be late in the game. And I think that many other numbers in the beginning of this presentation actually will be changed into the worst. Sad to say so.
I think it's interesting because this is the Verizon data breach report. There was another report that came out from SlashNext on May 22nd, and they showed an over a 4,000% increase in phishing attacks since ChatGPT was introduced in 2022. So there's clearly more attacks. I know that we had anecdotally seen that they are more sophisticated when they do use AI. They're better written, and that could be a real problem, particularly with BEC. It makes it seem a lot more convincing. It's well written, and then if you add the element of deepfake, there's some famous breaches lately where people have been completely spoofed from their voice to their actual image. So I think in the future we're going to see it, but what I think is interesting is that maybe all of those attacks are still mostly being caught at the perimeter, because while they might be more sophisticated in some ways, they aren't like really hacking and bypassing the technical protections that we have in place. So the breaches aren't necessarily going up so much with AI, but certainly the use of AI is absolutely seen.
It is. It is.
So this is what it comes down to. We've been discussing this really throughout each slide we've been narrating, but I'm going to just turn this over to you, Petri, and how to adapt security awareness programs for modern threats.
Yeah, I want to start always from the results point of view. And this is what we are capable of actually of delivering to our customers. This data is based on approximately 2 million users over 6 years period of time. You see actually the baseline numbers from 0 to 70. Those are 17 months altogether that we have collected the data for. So approximately 6 years or so. When we are engaging our end users, we are capable of getting actually the reporting rate, success rate of approximately 60% first year. And even that number is even developing on a year 6 to the level of approximately 80% or so. That's when you are really succeeding. That's when you are really making your people your asset. Another thing that I'm really proud of in this graph here is the blue bars, where the scale is on the right-hand side of the picture there. So how many real threats are reported by the end users to the security operating centers. And that's also growing steadily. So it's not only about the simulations, but it's also about really reporting the real cases to the SOC. What is not present in this slide is that the top 5% of the people are reporting actually those real threats in less than 2 minutes, which actually gives huge amount of time then, or not huge amount, but there's some good time for the SOC of removing the noise, removing the attacks before they become breaches or becoming issues or so.
Yeah, and they are really key points. And it ties back into that 2021 Verizon DBIR call out of the security awareness training platforms, which were compliance-based, which were test-based. The whole point that you're seeing here is that this is this is aspirational. Like this is, if you put behavioral science first, and if you put behavior first in your program and you do it the right way, this is completely achievable. To go from, let's say you have a really high reporting rate right now in your simulation to 20%. What we've seen typically is more like 7 to 10% as far as if you're using a quarterly SAT program. But you can actually get that within just a matter of 6 months up to over 60%. So these are real numbers, and that's a real outcome that people can achieve.
And those numbers actually related to this picture. They are really related to the methodology behind our system. First of all, the 60 to 80% success rate, it is not based on a model where everyone would be sent a same message and then the people could be warning each other that please report this, and then the reporting rate is getting higher. each and every simulation that is sent to our customers, it is actually individualized. It's individualized not only to avoid that stupid phenomenon where people are gossiping about that, please report this test from the security team, but it is individualized based on your specific skill level. If you are a newcomer, you are getting easier exercises. If you are old-timer who already knows this stuff very well, you are getting much more difficult exercises. This relates actually to a psychological concept of zone of proximal learning, meaning that you should constantly be challenged, but you shouldn't be challenged in a way that you are actually getting frustrated. And our AI model needs to actually understand the end user well enough to serve that sort of exercises that they are developing even after 6 years. I'm not today going to go deep into all of the other particles in this model here. Happy to discuss with you when you want to. But it's all about individualizing and making it relevant for the end users.
Yeah, absolutely. And all I would add on to that is you're making it relevant to the end users, and you're also making it relevant to the threat landscape too. Because one of the problems that we run into is that we're testing people and training people on yesterday's threats, but the threat landscape is constantly changing. It's constantly finding new ways to hit people. And our own research at one point last year found that QR code phishing became a huge problem, just a massive, 20 to 40x surge in QR codes because they were bypassing filters better than traditional links were. And so right away, the Hoxhunt platform started incorporating QR phishing simulations into the training because that's what was actually out there. That's just one example, but this happens all the time. There's always new threats, and you need to stay current with that. And that's adapted to the threat landscape. It's also adapted to people, the way that their skills change over time, their roles change over time. And AI is part of that. It's a big part of that to help you with the heavy lifting. But just in general, from the actual literal sense of being adaptive with your training program, it's a very important part of how you should approach it.
Yeah, let me build on top of that a bit. It is actually a process that happens on a bit behind. So when people are reporting those real cases to us, we have threat intel team that is actually reading them through constantly and finding immediately that what is new in the industry. Is it QR codes? Is it LLMs or whatever it is tomorrow? And they will be actually, they are the same team that is our content team. So they are actually converting that stuff to the content and having thousands of that sort of real life scenarios or simulations with us is a kind of great asset. But yes, you nailed it well. It's about relevancy. It's about individualization, and it's really the relevancy is related also to the development of the attack landscape.
Yeah, just looking forward, just real quick, we just got back from RSA recently, and at the booth at RSA, not one, not two, but like over a dozen people asked us if we were going to incorporate deepfakes into the phishing training. So people are looking ahead. People are already, I heard some, I won't reveal who, but several people have been hit and breached with deepfakes now. So it's coming, and you do want to keep your training adapted to the actual threat landscape.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we talked about a lot today. We have reached the end of our time, and now I would encourage everyone watching to please, if you have any questions left, please put those in the Q&A box, and we will address those as well as we can here.
Have a good one. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.